Today we'll hear a heartfelt story from America's troubled past, where a shy minister's daughter risks everything to help a desperate runaway slave, forever changing both their lives. In the sultry summer of 1851, Abigail Whitmore stood at the threshold of her father's modest clapboard house on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina. At 19, she was the quintessential preacher's daughter, demure, obedient, and painfully shy. Her golden brown hair was always neatly pinned, her dresses modest and plain, befitting Reverend Thomas Whitmore's standing in the community. The Reverend was a complicated man, respected among the white congregants, but known for his measured silence on the most pressing moral issue of their time: slavery. The Whitmores weren't plantation owners, but they existed within that world. Reverend Whitmore preached at the Chapel of the Holy Cross, where wealthy plantation families filled the pews each Sunday, their slaves waiting dutifully outside or in the cramped balcony section designated for colored worshippers. Abigail played the organ during services, her fingers trembling slightly whenever she felt eyes upon her. Music was her sanctuary, the only place where her voice, albeit translated through ivory keys, could truly be heard. That fateful evening, as Abigail collected herbs from their small kitchen garden, she heard a rustle from behind the woodshed. Most girls might have screamed or run inside, but curiosity, the one quality her father had never managed to suppress in her, drew her forward. There, huddled against the weathered boards, was a woman not much older than herself, her dark skin lacerated with fresh wounds, her eyes wild with fear. "Please," the woman whispered, "don't call out." Abigail froze, her basket of thyme and rosemary clutched against her chest. The woman was a runaway, that much was clear. The consequences for helping her would be severe, especially for the daughter of a preacher who counted plantation owners among his patrons. Yet something in the woman's eyes, a desperate dignity, reached past Abigail's lifelong conditioning. "What's your name?" Abigail asked, her voice barely audible. "Naomi," the woman replied, "from the Wilson Plantation." The Wilson Plantation. Even Abigail knew its reputation. Mr. Wilson was one of her father's most generous church supporters, but servants whispered about his cruelty. Wilson attended church faithfully each Sunday, his wife adorned in the finest silks, while stories of his treatment of slaves circulated in hushed tones among the household staff. "You can't stay here," Abigail said, but even as the words left her mouth, she was already calculating. The root cellar, seldom used in summer, her father would be gone 3 days on a preaching circuit. Mrs. Parrish, their housekeeper, wouldn't return until Monday. Naomi began to back away, and desperation clouding her features. "Wait," Abigail whispered, surprising herself, "just until nightfall. I'll bring water for your wounds." That night changed everything. As Abigail tended to Naomi's lacerations by candlelight in the damp confines of the root cellar, she learned Naomi's story. Born on the Wilson Plantation, Naomi had been separated from her mother at 12 and forced to work in the main house. She could read, taught secretly by Mrs. Wilson's elderly mother before she passed, a dangerous skill for a slave. When Mr. Wilson discovered Naomi reading a discarded newspaper, his punishment had been severe. But it wasn't just the beating that had driven her to flee, it was what Wilson had planned for her afterward. "He sold my brother last year," Naomi explained, wincing as Abigail applied a poultice to her back. "And now he's selling me to a man from New Orleans, a man who—" her voice broke. "A man who likes to break young women's spirits." Abigail's sheltered world cracked open that night. The institution her father carefully avoided criticizing from his pulpit suddenly had a face, a voice, wounds she could touch with her own hands. "I'm heading north," Naomi said. "There are people, a network. If I can reach the Cooper's farm beyond the county line—" "That's 20 miles at least," Abigail said. "I'll make it," Naomi replied with quiet determination. "Or die trying." Abigail should have given Naomi food, perhaps an old cloak, and sent her on her way. That would have been the extent of Christian charity expected even from a preacher's daughter in antebellum South Carolina. Instead, she made a decision that would alter both their lives irreversibly. 3 days, she said. Rest here 3 days until your strength returns. My father's away until then. I'll help you reach the Cooper farm. The next morning, Abigail made excuses to Mrs. Parrish about needing to practice the organ alone and sent the housekeeper home early. When the house was empty, she brought Naomi upstairs to bathe properly and gave her one of her own dresses, plain enough not to attract attention, but far better than the tattered garment she'd escaped in. As they sat in the kitchen, Naomi studied Abigail with curious eyes. "Why are you helping me? Your father would be ruined if anyone knew." Abigail considered the question as she poured weak tea into chipped cups. Not the good china, which might be missed. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "It's perhaps because I've lived 19 years without making a single choice that wasn't expected of me." Their conversations over those 3 days transformed Abigail. Naomi, despite her circumstances, possessed a fierce intelligence and a unquenchable thirst for knowledge. She had memorized passages from the Bible, not from devotion, but to understand the text used to justify her bondage. She could recite Shakespeare, fragments overheard from the Wilson children's lessons. She had opinions on everything, from politics to poetry, formed in secret through stolen moments with forbidden books and newspapers. "How can you know so much, living as you have?" Abigail asked on the second night. Naomi's smile held both pride and sadness. "When reading is forbidden, every word becomes precious. You memorize everything because you never know when you'll hold another book." On the third day, as they prepared for Naomi's departure after nightfall, a carriage arrived unexpectedly in the front drive. Through the parlor window, Abigail saw her father descending, a full day early. Behind him was Mr. Wilson himself, his imposing figure unmistakable even from a distance. "Quickly!" she hissed to Naomi, who had been helping her prepare a small pack of provisions. "The cellar! Now!" Naomi disappeared just as the front door opened. Reverend Whitmore's voice boomed through the house. "Abigail, are you home, child?" Smoothing her apron with trembling hands, Abigail emerged from the kitchen. "Father, you're early. And Mr. Wilson, what an unexpected pleasure." The Reverend's face was grave. "Mr. Wilson has suffered a theft, Abigail. One of his house slaves has run away, taking valuables with her. We're organizing a search of all properties in the area." Mr. Wilson stepped forward, his substantial frame dominating the modest entryway. "Forgive the intrusion, Miss Whitmore, but this slave is dangerous, educated above her station and filled with rebellious notions. We believe she may seek shelter with sympathetic souls." Abigail felt her heart hammering so violently she was certain they must hear it. "How dreadful," she managed. "But surely no one would dare shelter a fugitive. The law is quite clear." "Indeed it is," Wilson agreed, his eyes scanning the parlor behind her. "The Fugitive Slave Act means severe penalties for anyone harboring runaways, but sometimes misguided charity leads good Christians astray." The Reverend Whitmore placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Mr. Wilson and some of his men would like to search our property. Abigail, standard procedure, nothing to concern yourself with. Are you enjoying our story? Tell us where you're watching our videos from. Leave your city in the comments and let us know what kinds of stories you enjoy most. Have a story suggestion for us? We'd love to hear it. Now, back to our tale. For the next hour, Abigail endured the most excruciating anxiety of her life as Wilson's men searched the house, the yard, the small barn. Her father invited Wilson to take refreshment in his study, leaving Abigail to prepare tea with shaking hands. The root cellar entrance was in the kitchen pantry, a simple trapdoor covered with a small rug. If anyone moved that rug, yet somehow, miraculously, the search party overlooked it. The men were cursory in their inspection of the kitchen, more interested in the barn and outbuildings where a fugitive might more logically hide. When they finally departed, Abigail nearly collapsed with relief. That night, under cover of darkness, Abigail made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days before. She would not merely direct Naomi to the Cooper farm, she would take her there herself. "It's too dangerous," Naomi protested when Abigail revealed her plan. "If we're caught together—" "I know these woods better than you," Abigail insisted. "There's a path through the swamp that cuts 5 miles off the journey, but it's treacherous if you don't know it." What she didn't say was that something within her had fundamentally changed. The Abigail who played organ and kept her eyes downcast no longer seemed real. This new Abigail, the one who lied to her father's face and defied federal law, felt more authentic than any version of herself she'd previously known. They left after midnight, Abigail dressed in her plainest clothes, a shawl covering her distinctive hair. They moved through moonlit woods, skirting the main roads, speaking little. The night sounds of the Carolina Low Country, cicadas, frogs, the occasional splash of something entering the water, provided cover for their footsteps. Near dawn, they encountered their first real danger. The barking of hounds echoed. Through the pre-morning stillness, "Slave catchers," Naomi whispered, her body tensing like a hunted animal's. Abigail pulled her toward a shallow creek. "Water masks the scent. We need to wade upstream." For nearly an hour, they sloshed through frigid water, their skirts heavy and sodden, listening as the dogs' barking grew first louder, then gradually more distant. By sunrise, they had reached the edge of the swamp that would provide their shortcut to the Cooper farm. "We'll rest here until nightfall," Abigail decided, finding a dry spot sheltered by cypress trees. "The swamp is too dangerous to navigate in daylight anyway. Too many eyes." As they huddled together for warmth, their wet clothes slowly drying in patches of filtered sunlight, Naomi studied Abigail's face. "You've changed since we met." Abigail considered this. "Perhaps I'm becoming who I was always meant to be. And who is that? Someone who makes her own choices." Abigail's voice grew stronger. "My father preaches about divine purpose, but he never questions the purpose assigned to others. He speaks of souls, but accepts a system that denies some people have them." Naomi took Abigail's hand. "That kind of thinking is dangerous in these parts." "So is running away," Abigail replied with a small smile. "Yet, here we are." That night, they navigated the treacherous swamp by the light of a quarter moon. Abigail led with surprising confidence, pointing out patches of quicksand and water moccasin nests. By dawn, exhausted but triumphant, they spotted the Cooper farm in the distance, a modest homestead with a red barn, smoke already rising from the chimney. "The Coopers are Quakers," Abigail explained. "They don't advertise their beliefs in these parts, but they're known among certain circles for their convictions about slavery." At the edge of the woods, Abigail knew they must part. The Coopers wouldn't know her, might even suspect a trap if a white woman suddenly appeared with a runaway. "This is where I leave you," she said, her throat tight with emotion. Naomi gripped Abigail's hands. "Come with me," she urged suddenly. "North, to freedom. You don't belong here either." For one dizzying moment, Abigail considered it. A new life, reinvention, freedom from expectations. But reality asserted itself quickly. "If I disappear with you, they'll know I helped. They'll search harder, alert authorities further north. I'll endanger you and others on the network." She squeezed Naomi's hands. "But someday, perhaps." Naomi nodded, understanding. From a hidden pocket in her borrowed dress, she withdrew something small and pressed it into Abigail's palm. A carved wooden bird, small enough to conceal in a closed fist. "Oh, my father made this before he was sold away. It's all I have of him." Naomi's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Take it, to remember that cages aren't always made of iron." They embraced one final time before Naomi slipped away across the field toward the Cooper farm. Abigail watched until she saw a figure emerge from the farmhouse, greet Naomi cautiously, then usher her quickly inside. Only then did she begin her solitary journey home. The Abigail who returned to the Whitmore house 2 days later was physically the same, exhausted and mud-stained, but recognizable. Inwardly, however, she was transformed. She had crafted an explanation for her absence, a fabricated spiritual retreat in the woods, seeking guidance that her father, though skeptical, ultimately accepted. His relief at her return overshadowed his doubts. What Reverend Whitmore couldn't see was that his dutiful daughter now lived a double life. By day, she played the organ, attended to household duties, and spoke softly when spoken to. But she began to make connections, cautious conversations with the Coopers at market days, careful correspondence with northern abolitionists disguised as innocuous letters to fictional school friends. The wooden bird remained hidden in a secret compartment she carved beneath her dresser drawer. 6 months after Naomi's departure, Abigail received a letter forwarded through 3 different hands. It contained only a few lines in a careful script. "The bird has found a nest among friends in Pennsylvania. The cage door remains open for others. Your hands helped open it." Over the next 9 years, until the outbreak of the Civil War, 27 enslaved people found temporary shelter in the Whitmore root cellar on their journey north. Abigail's network expanded carefully. The Cooper farm, a sympathetic widower with a wagon business, a freed black family who operated a rural smithy. Her father, increasingly preoccupied with the growing tensions between North and South. He never suspected that his own home had become a station on the Underground Railroad. When war finally came in 1861, South Carolina's eager embrace of the Confederate cause made Abigail's activities even more dangerous. Yet she persisted, now hiding not only fugitive slaves, but also Union sympathizers and draft dodgers. The shy organist had become, in secret, one of the most effective conductors on the Underground Railroad in the Low Country. In late 1863, after the Emancipation Proclamation, but before its effects could reach deep into Confederate territory, disaster finally struck. A young man Abigail had sheltered was captured 30 miles north and, under duress, revealed details about the network that helped him. Confederate Home Guard officers arrived at the Whitmore house while Abigail was harboring a family of 5. Reverend Whitmore, now aged and increasingly frail, was devastated by his daughter's betrayal. As she was taken away in custody, he refused to meet her eyes. "You have brought shame upon this house and upon the cloth I wear," were his last words to her. Abigail spent 8 months in a Charleston jail, charged with treason against the Confederacy. Her trial was delayed repeatedly as the war's tide turned against the South. By the time her case finally came before a judge, Sherman's March had begun, and the Confederacy was crumbling. Rather than proceed with a politically complicated trial, authorities released her to house arrest in February 1865. She returned to find her father's house abandoned, the Reverend having fled to relatives in Georgia. With nowhere else to go, she reclaimed the empty house and was still there when Union forces occupied Charleston weeks later. As federal Reconstruction began, Abigail emerged publicly as an abolitionist for the first time. She converted her father's church, abandoned by its wealthy white congregation, into a school for formerly enslaved children and adults. The shy preacher's daughter became known as Miss Abigail to generations of black students who learned to read and write under her tutelage. In 1870, 5 years after the war's end, a visitor arrived at the schoolhouse. A well-dressed black woman stepped from a hired carriage, surveying the building with a measured gaze. When she entered and found Abigail instructing a class of children, both women froze in recognition. Naomi had returned, now a free woman, and a teacher herself in a Pennsylvania Quaker community. The years had matured her beauty and strengthened her already formidable presence. "Dee, I came to return something that belongs to you," she said when the children had been dismissed. From her pocket, she withdrew the wooden bird that Abigail had kept for years before sending it north with a message, shortly before her arrest. As they embraced, 19 years of separate journeys melted away. That evening, sitting on the porch of what had once been Reverend Whitmore's house, they shared their stories. Naomi had married a fellow teacher, had 2 children, and helped establish schools for freed people throughout the North. Abigail had never married, devoting herself instead to her dangerous work during the war and to education afterward. "Will you stay?" Abigail asked as twilight descended. Naomi smiled. "My family is established in Pennsylvania, but I've been offered a position with the Freedmen's Bureau here in South Carolina. They need experienced teachers." Her eyes held Abigail's. "We could work together." And so they did. For the next 3 decades, until Abigail's death in 1901, the 2 women led educational initiatives across South Carolina. They never lived under the same roof. Such an arrangement between a white and black woman would have invited too much scrutiny, even in Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction South. But they remained the closest of friends and colleagues. Their bond forged in those dangerous days of 1851, unbreakable by time or circumstance. In her final years, Abigail wrote a memoir that she instructed should only be published after both. She and Naomi had passed. In it, she described that fateful moment in her father's garden. "I was raised to believe that obedience was the highest virtue a woman could possess. But that night, when I saw Naomi's desperate eyes, I learned that sometimes the highest virtue is disobedience. Disobedience to unjust laws, to cruel traditions, to the voices that tell us we are too small, too weak, too insignificant to make a difference. In helping one woman find freedom, I found my own." The memoir, published in 1923, became a sensation. By then, both women had been dead for over a decade, but their story resonated with a new generation of Americans, grappling with questions of justice and equality. The book was translated into multiple languages and found its way into classrooms across the nation, inspiring countless young people to stand up for what they believed was right. Naomi's descendants, now scattered across the northern states, read about their ancestors' courage with pride and amazement. Many had heard fragments of the story passed down through family oral tradition, but seeing it in print, with Abigail's detailed account of their escape and the years that followed, gave them a fuller picture of the remarkable woman who had risked everything for freedom. The house where Abigail had hidden Naomi was eventually turned into a museum. Visitors could see the small root cellar where Naomi had spent those terrifying days, the kitchen where Abigail had prepared meals, while her heart pounded with fear, and the garden where their friendship had first bloomed. A bronze plaque by the front door read, "In this house, 2 women proved that courage knows no color and that the bonds of friendship can overcome the barriers of prejudice." But perhaps the most fitting memorial to their friendship was the school that still operated in Philadelphia, now serving its 4th generation of students. The Whitmore Freeman Academy had grown from Naomi's small classroom into a prestigious institution, known for its commitment to social justice and equality. Every year, on the anniversary of Naomi's escape, students gathered to read passages from Abigail's memoir and to reflect on the courage it takes to do what is right, even when the world tells you it is wrong. In the school's main hallway hung a painting commissioned in 1901, showing 2 women, one white, one black, standing together in a garden, their hands clasped in friendship. The artist had never met either woman, working only from descriptions provided by those who knew them, But somehow he had captured the essence of their bond, the quiet strength, the mutual respect, the love that had transcended the artificial barriers of their time. Students often pause before this painting, especially those facing their own moments of moral choice. They would remember the story of the timid preacher's daughter who found her voice, and the runaway slave who found not just freedom, but a lifelong friend. They would think about the courage it took to hide in a root cellar, to defy a father's wishes, to risk everything for a stranger who became a sister. The ripple effects of that one night in 1851 continued to spread long after both women were gone. Former students of the academy became teachers, lawyers, doctors, and activists, carrying with them the lessons they had learned about standing up for justice. Some traced their commitment to civil rights directly back to the story of Abigail and Naomi, crediting their example with inspiring them to fight for equality in their own time. In 1963, during the March on Washington, an elderly woman named Sarah Freeman Johnson stood in the crowd listening to Dr. King's famous speech. She was Naomi's great-granddaughter, and in her purse she carried a worn copy of Abigail's memoir, as Dr. King spoke about his dream of a nation where people would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And Sarah thought about her great-grandmother and the white woman who had risked everything to help her find freedom. After the march, Sarah visited the Whitmore Freeman Academy, where she met with the current headmaster and shared her family's memories of Naomi. She donated several items that had belonged to her great-grandmother, including a small wooden cross that Naomi had carved during her years as a teacher, and a letter she had written to Abigail shortly before her death, expressing her gratitude for the friendship that had shaped both their lives. The letter, now displayed in the school's museum, contained these words: "My dearest Abigail, as I write this, I am surrounded by my children and grandchildren, all of them free, all of them educated, all of them living lives I could never have imagined when I was running through those dark woods toward your father's house. You gave me more than shelter that night. You gave me hope, and hope is the most precious gift one person can give another. I pray that somewhere you are at peace, knowing that the seeds we planted in that little garden have grown into a forest of freedom." Today, visitors to Charleston can take a walking tour that includes stops at several sites related to the Underground Railroad, including the Whitmore House. Tour guides tell the story of the preacher's daughter and the runaway slave, emphasizing how their friendship challenged the social order of their time and helped pave the way for the civil rights movement that would come a century later. The story of Abigail Whitmore and Naomi Freeman serves as a reminder that ordinary people, faced with extraordinary circumstances, can choose to be heroes. Their bond, forged in danger and strengthened by shared purpose, proved that love and friendship can indeed shake the foundations of injustice and plant the seeds of a more equitable world.